Snow blankets the mountainside as Elias trudges upward, breath forming clouds in the bitter air. Abandoned at 6 and raised by the village below, the solitary 12-year-old finds companionship only in Max, his loyal shepherd dog. Villagers whisper about the quiet boy who wanders the forests alone. Today, fleeing the taunts of other children, they venture farther up the mountain than ever before, following a forgotten trail through frost-covered pines. As the trees thin, a stone structure emerges through the mist, crumbling walls and fallen towers, revealing a castle forgotten by time. In its remains, Elias discovers a weathered journal with sketches of gardens and fountains that once adorned this desolate place. What secrets lie hidden within these ancient walls? Could this abandoned fortress become something beautiful again? Might a boy forsaken by his parents find among these ruins the paradise he's always longed for? Elias stands transfixed before the massive stone structure that emerges from the mountain mist, its weathered walls and crumbling towers a stark silhouette against the pale winter sky, while Max circles the perimeter, nose to the ground, tail wagging with the excitement of discovery as snowflakes gather on his thick fur. The boy approaches cautiously, gloved hands brushing against the ancient stones, feeling the rough texture beneath his fingertips as though the very walls might speak to him of their forgotten history, might explain the strange flutter of recognition in his chest that makes no sense for a village orphan who has never ventured this far up the mountain before today. A cold wind whistles through broken ramparts and empty window frames, carrying the scent of pine and frozen earth as Elias follows the outer wall, noting the elaborate carvings half hidden beneath creeping moss and ice. Vines, flowers, and what appears to be a family crest obscured by years of weathering. Max barks suddenly, drawing the boy's attention to a section of wall where stones have tumbled inward, creating a narrow opening just wide enough for a slender 12-year-old and his dog to squeeze through. Heart pounding with equal measures of apprehension and curiosity, Elias ducks into the shadowy entrance, careful of loose stones overhead, and emerges into what must have once been a grand entrance hall, now open to the elements where portions of the ceiling have collapsed, allowing weak winter sunlight to illuminate the decay of former splendor. Faded tapestries hang in tatters from walls. Ornate furniture lies broken and rotting, and the flagstone floor is cracked where persistent mountain plants have forced their way through in defiance of stone and mortar. The boy moves deeper into the castle's embrace, his footsteps echoing in chambers that have known only silence for decades, while Max darts ahead, disappearing through doorways and returning with soft whines that seem to urge his master forward, deeper into the maze of corridors and abandoned rooms that grow darker as the winter day wanes. In what appears to have been a study, Elias finds himself drawn to an ornately carved fireplace where stone vines twist around columns and delicate flowers bloom in eternally frozen perfection despite the layer of dust covering their intricate details. Running his fingers along the mantelpiece, he feels a slight give in one section, a carved rose that depresses under his touch, releasing a hidden mechanism with a soft click that causes a small panel to slide open in the stonework, revealing a niche protected from the elements and the passage of time. Inside lies a leather-bound journal, its cover embossed with the same crest he noticed on the outer walls, now clearly visible, a tree in full bloom rising from a castle turret. With trembling hands, Elias opens the journal to find page after page of meticulous drawings, elaborate gardens with meandering paths, graceful fountains, arbors heavy with flowering vines, and terraces overlooking sweeping vistas of mountains that match the very view outside these crumbling walls. The artistry is breathtaking, each sketch annotated with notes about plant varieties and seasonal blooming times, creating a paper record of paradise where now only broken stone and winter-dead brambles remain. As daylight fades and shadows lengthen across the study floor, Elias turns to the final page where flowing script catches his eye, words written in a different hand from the garden notes, larger and more formal. When the true heir of Aldridge returns to claim these walls, the forgotten gardens shall bloom once more, and what was broken shall be made whole. This I vow with my dying breath, that my son may one day know his rightful home. The dying winter sun casts long shadows across the village square as Elias hurries through the gathering dusk, the precious journal clutched tightly against his chest beneath his threadbare coat, his mind still filled with visions of stone towers and hidden gardens, while Max trots faithfully at his heels, occasionally growling at the village dogs that bark territorial warnings from behind wooden fences. Despite the biting cold that has emptied the narrow streets, A group of children still lingers by the central well, their laughter cutting through the crisp mountain air as sharp as the icicles hanging from the eaves of tightly clustered cottages, and something in Elias urges him to share his discovery, a momentary forgetting of the countless times these same children have made him regret any attempt at connection. "I found a castle," he blurts out as he approaches, words tumbling forth with uncharacteristic animation, his normally guarded eyes alight with excitement as he describes the crumbling towers, the hidden journal, the mysterious message about an heir. But his enthusiasm withers beneath their incredulous stares that quickly transform into mocking smirks and barely suppressed giggles. "Poor orphan boy has gone mad from loneliness," Thomas Becker sneers, his broad frame blocking Elias's path while the others form a loose circle, their faces transformed from childish innocence to cruel amusement in the span of a heartbeat. "Next he will tell us he is actually a lost prince," adds Lydia, flipping her braids with practiced disdain as the others laugh, the sound echoing off stone cottages and reverberating through Elias like physical blows that drive the warmth of discovery from his body, replacing it with the familiar cold weight of exclusion. Max growls low in his throat, sensing his master's distress, pressing closer to the boy's leg as Elias clutches the journal tighter, suddenly afraid they might try to take it, might destroy this tenuous connection to something that felt inexplicably like belonging. But Thomas merely shoves him roughly aside with a dismissive, crazy mountain boy before the group moves away, their laughter lingering in the frigid air like poison. With shoulders hunched against more than just the cold, Elias trudges toward the humble cottage that serves as his home, a small structure maintained by rotating village families who fulfill their Christian duty of housing the orphaned child without ever making him feel truly wanted. But as he passes the last dwelling on the village outskirts, a voice calls out from a garden gate partially hidden by enormous dried bundles of herbs hanging from its weathered posts. "Boy, is that you muttering about castles and journals?" asks Miss Clara, her wizened face appearing from behind a curtain of dried lavender, eyes sharp despite her advanced years that have bent her once tall frame into a permanent question mark. Unlike the others in the village who view her herbal remedies with a mixture of gratitude and suspicion, Elias has always found a quiet acceptance in the old woman's presence. And now he finds himself drawn to her small cottage, with its perpetual aroma of medicinal herbs and wood smoke, the journal still clutched protectively to his chest. "Come in before you catch your death," she urges, ushering boy and dog into the welcome warmth of her kitchen where dried plants hang from every available beam and surface, creating a fragrant forest that seems to hold summer captive despite winter's grip outside. As Elias slowly unfolds his tale, carefully placing the journal on her scrubbed wooden table, Miss Clara's expression shifts from polite interest to focused intensity, her gnarled fingers tracing the embossed crest with surprising tenderness. "Aldridge Castle," she murmurs, the name falling from her lips like a forgotten prayer. It has stood empty these 50 years or more, ever since the tragedy. Her eyes lift to study Elias's face with new attention, noting features she seems to be seeing for the first time. "The villagers say it is cursed, that no Aldridge can ever return without disaster following, but curses are often just memories twisted by fear and ignorance," she continues, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "How strange that you should be the one to find it, of all the children in this village." Dawn breaks in ribbons of pale gold across the mountain peaks as Elias sets out once more toward the castle, Miss Clara's cryptic words about curses and strange coincidences tumbling through his mind, while the journal rests safely in his coat pocket, a weight both physical and symbolic against his heart. Max bounds ahead through melting patches of snow, his path confident as though the castle already represents familiar territory, while Elias follows with growing anticipation that pushes aside the lingering sting of the village children's mockery and replaces it with a sense of purpose he has rarely felt in his 12 years of existence. The journey seems shorter this second time, the hidden path more evident beneath his boots, as winter reluctantly loosens its grip on the mountainside, revealing hints of green amid the brown and gray landscape that grows increasingly rocky as they climb higher toward the castle that now rises before them like a sentinel frozen in time. With newfound confidence, Elias squeezes through the same collapsed entrance, careful to mark their path this time by scratching small arrows into the dusty stone floors as they venture deeper into the labyrinth of corridors and chambers, methodically exploring rooms they missed in their initial discovery. Kitchens with massive hearths large enough for a man to stand in, Servants' quarters with simple wooden beds now reduced to rotting frames, storage rooms with empty shelves and broken pottery, each space revealing another fragment of the life that once animated these silent walls. The morning sun climbs higher, sending shafts of light through broken ceilings and cracked walls that guide their exploration, until Max suddenly freezes, ears perked forward, before darting through a partially collapsed archway that Elias must stoop to follow, emerging into a space so vast it momentarily steals his breath. A great hall with soaring ceilings supported by stone columns that reach upward like ancient trees, much of its roof surprisingly intact despite the decades of abandonment. Unlike the other rooms, with their evidence of looting and decay, this hall retains an echo of grandeur in its massive fireplace and ornate stonework. But what draws Elias forward with slow, reverent steps are the walls where faded murals stretch from floor to ceiling, their colors dimmed by time but still visible enough to reveal scenes of the castle in its glory days. Surrounded by terraced gardens that cascade down the mountainside in a riot of color and life that matches the sketches in the journal with stunning accuracy. Sunlight shifts as clouds pass overhead, illuminating different sections of the murals in a moving spotlight that seems almost deliberate as it finally settles on a family portrait centered on the wall opposite the fireplace. A stern-looking man with a neatly trimmed beard stands beside a woman whose gentle smile softens her regal bearing, while between them, a boy of perhaps 6 or 7 years gazes out from the painting with solemn eyes, the exact shade of blue-gray that Elias sees each morning in his own reflection. The resemblance sends a jolt through his body like a physical shock, causing him to stumble backward until his shoulders meet the cold stone wall, unable to tear his gaze from the painted child who shares not only his unusual eye color, but also the distinctive arch of his eyebrows, the slight cleft in his chin. Features Elias has never seen mirrored in any villager's face despite years of searching for someone, anyone, who might share some physical trait that could hint at his origins. Max whines softly, pressing against his legs as though sensing the turmoil of questions suddenly flooding his master's mind. Questions about abandonment and inheritance, about curses and coincidences, about a journal hidden away with instructions for a true heir and a painted boy who wears his face from centuries past. Spring arrives on the mountainside in tentative bursts of green that push through melting snow, mirroring the stubborn determination that brings Elias back to the castle day after day. A worn burlap sack filled with tools borrowed from the village smith slung over his narrow shoulders while Max trots beside him, now familiar with the path that winds upward through awakening forest. The resemblance between himself and the painted boy haunts Elias, drawing him to the castle with questions that crowd his mind during sleepless nights in his village bed. Questions that find expression in his hands as he begins clearing debris from what appears to have been a small courtyard adjacent to the great hall, methodically removing fallen stones, rotted wooden beams, and decades of accumulated leaves and dirt. Sweat beads on his forehead despite the lingering mountain chill as he works with single-minded focus, carefully setting aside stones that might be useful for rebuilding while discarding those too damaged to salvage, creating neat piles that transform chaos into order, destruction into potential, much as the journal sketches transformed his vision of the ruins into a glimpse of what might be possible with enough time and effort. The morning sun climbs higher, warming his back as he kneels to extract a particularly stubborn root that has wound itself through the cracked paving stones, his fingers digging into soil made soft by recent rain, pushing deeper until they brush against something smooth and cold that does not yield like stone or root. Curiosity piqued, Elias scrapes away more dirt to reveal an edge, then a curve, then the full circumference of what appears to be a medallion embedded in the earth, its surface caked with soil that he gently brushes away to reveal intricate carvings beneath. The same tree and castle crest from the journal cover, surrounded by flowing script and embellishments of remarkable craftsmanship. With careful fingers, he works the medallion free from its earthen prison, surprised by its weight and the warm gleam of metal beneath the tarnish, suggesting silver or perhaps even gold beneath decades of dirt and oxidation. That evening, after hiding his tools within the castle walls for his next visit, Elias makes his way directly to Miss Clara's cottage, the medallion wrapped in a scrap of cloth and tucked safely in his pocket, a tangible connection to the mystery that grows more compelling with each discovery. The old woman welcomes him with herbal tea and honey cakes, her rheumy eyes brightening at the excitement evident in the normally reserved boy's face as he carefully unwraps his treasure and places it on her herb-strewn table. The reaction is immediate and startling. Miss. Clara's wrinkled hand flies to her throat, her face draining of color as she stares at the medallion with an expression Elias cannot quite decipher. Something between recognition and fear flickering across features, suddenly gone rigid. "Where did you find this?" she whispers, not touching the object, though her eyes never leave its gleaming surface. When Elias explains, describing the courtyard and his clearing efforts, she listens with uncharacteristic silence, her gnarled fingers clutching her shawl tightly around bony shoulders that seem to have curled further inward. "It is nothing," she finally says, pushing the medallion back toward him with trembling hands. "Just an old decoration, meaningless now." But her eyes betray her words, darting nervously to the window as though expecting to find someone watching. And when Elias presses her about the crest, about the family in the mural who share his features, about the strange coincidence of his name matching that on the journal, she suddenly becomes busy with her herbs, speaking of remedies and weather changes, of anything except the castle and its secrets, leaving the boy clutching the medallion with more questions than answers as dusk deepens outside the cottage windows. Late spring sunlight slants through newly cleared windows in the great hall as Elias studies the journal with growing fascination, noting how certain sketches contain oddly specific measurements that correspond to architectural features within the castle when tested against actual walls and doorways. A particular drawing catches his attention today, a detailed sketch of a stone bench positioned against a courtyard wall, beneath which appears a small notation different from the other gardening notes. A sequence of numbers followed by the phrase, "Where prosperity sleeps until awakened." Racing to the partially cleared courtyard, Elias locates the bench depicted in the drawing, its ornate legs still intact despite the cracked seat, and counts paving stones according to the notation, finding himself before a section of wall that appears unremarkable except for a nearly invisible seam that forms a perfect rectangle when traced with careful fingers. Heart pounding, he presses against different sections until feeling a slight give, followed by the sound of ancient mechanisms groaning to life somewhere within the stone, causing a section of the wall to swing inward on hinges hidden for decades beneath layers of ivy and moss. Cool air rushes out from the darkness beyond as Elias peers into a chamber untouched by time or looters, a space perfectly sealed against the elements and hidden from those without knowledge of its existence. Dust motes dance in the shaft of light that follows him inside, illuminating rows of shelves containing objects arranged with careful precision, terracotta pots of various sizes, pruning shears with wooden handles polished by years of use, trowels and spades with blades still sharp beneath a thin layer of dust, and most remarkably, dozens of small packets and glass jars containing seeds, each labeled in the same flowing script as the journal notes, their contents apparently preserved in the cool, dry environment of their hidden sanctuary. Oil lamps sit ready on a central workbench, their wicks and oil miraculously intact, allowing Elias to light one with trembling hands, its warm glow expanding to reveal walls lined with diagrams of plant breeding experiments and maps of garden layouts that extend far beyond what currently exists in the ruined courtyard. The flickering light catches on something larger hanging on the far wall, drawing the boy forward until he stands before a portrait in an ornate gold frame. Larger and more detailed than the mural in the great hall, but depicting the same family. The stern father with his trimmed beard, the gentle mother with kind eyes, and between them, the solemn boy whose features mirror Elias's own with such precision that he raises a hand to his face, tracing the line of his jaw, the curve of his cheek, as though to confirm his own existence separate from this painted doppelganger who stares back at him across the centuries. In the portrait, the boy wears a small medallion around his neck, identical to the one Elias discovered in the courtyard and now carries in his pocket. The weight of it suddenly more significant as he pulls it out and holds it up beside the painting, matching every detail, every curve and inscription, while Max whines softly beside him, sensing the profound shift occurring within his young master as pieces of a puzzle generations old begin to align with terrible and wonderful clarity. The chamber extends deeper than Elias initially realized, the lamplight revealing an adjoining alcove, where glass cabinets contain botanical specimens preserved in clear solution, their unusual colors and forms suggesting plants unlike any found in the village markets or surrounding wilderness, specimens labeled with scientific nomenclature and dates spanning decades of careful experimentation, a living archive of Aldridge botanical innovation that represents generations of knowledge thought lost forever. Moving deeper into the chamber with Max padding cautiously behind, Elias discovers workbenches with leather-bound volumes documenting cross-pollination techniques and soil composition formulas, handwritten notes in different scripts suggesting multiple generations contributing to a shared scientific pursuit, the passion for creation evident in the meticulous documentation of failures and breakthroughs in equal measure. The air itself seems different here, carrying a subtle fragrance of dried herbs and preserved flowers that triggers something in Elias's mind, a memory impossible to possess yet undeniably present, as though his body remembers what his conscious mind cannot. A visceral recognition that sends goosebumps rising along his arms, as he continues exploring what feels increasingly like a sanctuary prepared specifically for him to find. The portrait commands his attention again and again, drawing his gaze back to study details he missed in his initial shock. The background showing this very castle in its prime, with gardens cascading down the mountainside in spectacular terraces. The family positioned before a fountain identical to the one he has begun restoring in the courtyard. And most significantly, a leather-bound journal on a small table beside the painted family, identical to the one Elias now carries everywhere, suggesting the portrait was created after the journal was written, a deliberate documentation of connection meant to survive whatever fate befell the subjects. When his fingers brush against the medallion again, he notices for the first time a nearly invisible seam along its edge, and with careful pressure, it too opens to reveal a tiny compartment containing a folded scrap of parchment with words written in the same hand as the final journal entry. To my son, blood calls to blood across time. Trust what the roses tell you. Cryptic yet deeply personal words that make his heart race with implications too profound to fully comprehend in this moment of discovery. The sleek black car creeps along the village's single-paved road like an alien creature, its polished surface reflecting the modest cottages and curious faces of villagers who rarely see such luxury in their remote mountain community. The engine's quiet purr a stark contrast to the rattling farm trucks that occasionally disturb the rural quiet. Children abandon their games to cluster at a safe distance, whispering and pointing as the vehicle finally comes to rest before the village inn. A humble two-story building that hasn't hosted outside visitors since the hiking season ended last autumn, while adults pause in their daily tasks, watching with undisguised interest as the driver's door swings open and a man unfolds his tall frame with fluid grace. His tailored suit speaks of wealth as clearly as his confident stride, and the casual way he straightens platinum cufflinks that catch the afternoon sunlight, his salt and pepper hair expertly styled, his clean-shaven face handsome, despite the hard set of his jaw and the calculating assessment in eyes that scan the village square with the intensity of a predator marking territory. Several women gasp softly when he turns toward the gathering crowd, murmuring to each other behind raised hands while the village baker whispers to the blacksmith, "Look at those eyes, that chin, like our orphan boy grown wealthy," and others nod in silent agreement at the undeniable resemblance that becomes more apparent the longer they study the stranger, whose aristocratic features echo Elias's in matured red form. From the unusual blue-gray eyes to the distinctive arch of eyebrows and the cleft chin that has always marked the abandoned child as different from the sturdy mountain stock that populates the village. The innkeeper hurries forward with uncharacteristic deference, escorting the visitor inside where curious ears soon report he has taken the largest room for an indefinite stay, his questions beginning almost immediately over a glass of the inn's best wine, casual inquiries about the mountain trails, the old ruins that might interest a history enthusiast, the families who have lived in the region longest, each question delivered with practiced charm that nonetheless carries an undercurrent of command accustomed to obedience. By evening, his name circulates through the village like a foreign coin passed from hand to hand, Mr. Aldridge of Blackstone Development, a name that causes Miss Clara to drop a pitcher of milk when she hears it spoken at the village well, her weathered face draining of color as she hurries home with unusual haste, bolting her door against the spring twilight and the whispers that follow her retreat. Meanwhile, Elias remains blissfully unaware of the visitor as he works at the castle until dusk, carefully transplanting the first seedlings sprouted from the preserved seeds into the newly cleared courtyard soil, speaking softly to Max about his plans for restoring the hidden gardens, his mind filled with visions of blooming terraces rather than the stranger, whose arrival in the village has set in motion wheels of destiny that have waited patiently through years of silence and secrets. Wheels that now begin to turn with the inexorable momentum of truths too long buried returning at last to the light. The stranger's presence continues to ripple through the village well into the night, lights burning unusually late in cottages where families discuss the significance of his arrival and uncanny resemblance to their orphan boy. Conversations punctuated by nervous glances toward the darkened mountain where the castle ruins loom invisible yet ever present in their collective consciousness. While at the inn, Mr. Fenn, Aldridge sits alone by the fire long after other patrons have departed, methodically reviewing documents spread before him on a polished leather portfolio bearing the distinctive logo of Blackstone Development above the tagline "Transforming Landscapes, Creating Futures." The innkeeper, hovering nearby with the pretense of attending the fire, catches glimpses of what appear to be survey maps of the mountain and architectural renderings of a sprawling resort complex superimposed over familiar terrain, complete with helicopter landing pads and luxury villas positioned precisely where the castle ruins currently stand. Images that send an involuntary shiver down his spine, despite the warmth of the hearth. In her cottage at the village edge, Miss Clara paces her small kitchen with agitation that belies her advanced years, occasionally pausing to peer through curtains toward the inn where candlelight still glows in the corner window of the largest room, her gnarled fingers working at the frayed edge of her shawl as she murmurs prayers that sound more like warnings, names spoken with reverence and fear in equal measure. Morning brings no relief to the unsettled atmosphere as Mr. Aldridge emerges from the inn dressed for hiking in clothing whose practical appearance is belied by the evident quality of materials and tailoring. Expensive boots that have never known mud now carrying him toward the mountain path, a small leather satchel slung casually over one shoulder while the innkeeper's son follows at a respectful distance, hired as a guide but clearly uncomfortable with the arrangement, his backward glances toward the village betraying a desire to be elsewhere as they begin their ascent toward the castle ruins where Elias, still ignorant of the visitor's existence and significance, has already begun his day's work with the single-minded focus of someone communing with ghosts only he can perceive. Max standing sentinel at the courtyard entrance as though already sensing approaching danger on the mountain breeze. Morning mist clings to the mountainside as Elias kneels in the courtyard soil, his hands working methodically to create neat rows in the earth. He has spent weeks amending with compost carried painstakingly from the village in a borrowed wheelbarrow. With reverent care, he opens the first of the seed packets rescued from the hidden chamber, marveling at the tiny dormant lives preserved within. Seeds labeled in faded ink as Aldridge Blue Roses. Perfected 1,823, their dark shells showing no signs of deterioration, despite the decades spent in darkness. Following the detailed planting instructions from the journal, he creates shallow trenches with his finger, gently placing each seed at precise intervals before covering them with a thin layer of soil and a whispered hope that feels like prayer, moving methodically through varieties with names both familiar and strange. Mountain lilies, silver leaf vines, Duchess peonies, emperor tulips, each packet containing what might be the last examples of plants cultivated specifically for this mountain sanctuary by hands long since returned to dust. Days pass in a rhythm of village chores and castle restoration, Elias dividing his time between obligations to his reluctant guardians and the growing sense of purpose he finds among the ruins, until the evening he notices the first green shoots pushing through the courtyard soil, tiny miracles that send him racing down the mountain path to Miss Farce, Clara's cottage, bursting through her door with unprecedented excitement. The old woman startles at his entrance, quickly covering papers spread across her table, but her expression softens at the joy radiating from the normally solemn boy as he describes the sprouting seeds, the varieties taking root, the promise of flowers not seen in generations. As Elias speaks, Miss Clara studies him with eyes that seem to carry the weight of secrets long kept, her gnarled fingers twisting nervously in her lap until she finally interrupts his botanical recitation with a voice barely above a whisper. The Aldridge family owned that castle for 300 years, she says, the name falling between them like a stone disturbing still water. They were wealthy beyond imagination, aristocrats who controlled half the mountain, but they were kind masters, unlike many of their station. Her eyes drift to the window, to the mountain silhouette visible against the darkening sky. 50 years ago, they vanished in a single night, the entire family, with rumors of foul play that were never proven, leaving everything behind as though they intended to return by morning. She turns back to Elias, her gaze traveling over his features with new intentness. There was a son, a boy named Elias, heir to everything. Her weathered hand reaches out to touch his cheek briefly, a gesture so gentle it makes his breath catch. I was young then, working as a housemaid in the castle when it happened, when everything changed. A long silence stretches between them, broken only by the soft crackling of the fire in her small hearth, before she continues with obvious reluctance. The plants you describe, they were special, created through generations of careful breeding, said to respond only to the touch of Aldridge blood, to bloom only for the true air. Her eyes lock with his, searching, weighing, deciding. 6 years ago, a child was left at the church steps on the coldest night of winter. A medallion around his neck bearing a crest not seen in these mountains for decades, a name stitched into his blanket that echoed from the past like a ghost returning. Miss. Clara rises slowly, retrieving a small wooden box from behind a loose stone in her hearth. I have watched you grow, have seen your eyes that mirror those in portraits long hidden from view, have wondered when the mountain would call you home. Rain patters against the windows of Miss Clara's cottage as she pours herbal tea into 3 mismatched cups, the aroma of mint and chamomile mingling with the earthy scent of damp wool emanating from the elderly man who sits by her fire, his gnarled hands stretched toward the flames, fingers twisted by arthritis and decades of working the soil. Elias, this is Mr. Edwin, Miss. Clara says, placing a cup before the boy who has arrived, soaked from his daily journey down from the castle, Max, shaking himself dry near the door. He was head gardener at Aldridge Castle for 30 years before the family disappeared. The old man turns roimy eyes toward Elias, assessing him with a penetrating gaze that seems to strip away pretense, his weathered face remaining impassive, though something flickers briefly in his expression before he nods once, accepting the introduction with the gravity of a judge weighing evidence. Miss, Clara tells me you have found the old journal and some seeds that still grow, he says, his voice surprisingly strong despite his frail appearance, each word delivered with careful precision as though measuring their worth before release. The Aldridge Gardens were once famous throughout Europe, a botanical wonder at this elevation where plants from around the world thrived when they should have perished. As lightning illuminates the cottage in brief, ghostly flashes, Edwin describes sophisticated irrigation systems hidden beneath courtyard stones, specialized soil mixtures for different garden sections, pruning techniques unique to the mountain climate, each detail matching entries in the journal but expanded with practical knowledge that could only come from years of implementation. His passion for the gardens evident in the way his hands sketch shapes in the air, momentarily freed from pain by memories of his life's work. Encouraged by the old gardener's expertise, Elias describes the plants already sprouting in the courtyard, the silver vine with its unusual growth patterns, the blue-tinged rose shoots, the lily bulbs sending up sturdy stems at twice the normal rate, each description causing Edwin's eyebrows to rise incrementally higher until he exchanges a significant glance with Miss Clara that the boy nearly misses in his enthusiasm. Those are Aldridge specialties, Edwin confirms, sipping his tea with a thoughtful expression. Created through generations of careful breeding, plants that respond to certain conditions in ways ordinary varieties never could. When Elias eagerly asks about the family themselves, however, the old man's demeanor shifts perceptibly, his shoulders tensing beneath his worn jacket, his answers becoming clipped and vague despite the detailed horticultural information he freely shared moments before. Lord Aldridge was a fair employer, demanding but generous, he offers with a dismissive wave that suggests the topic should be abandoned. The family kept to themselves mostly, devoted to their gardens and studies. Despite Elias's persistent questions about the mysterious disappearance, about the boy in the portrait who shares his features, about the medallion that matches the one in his pocket, Edwin maintains his reticence, speaking only of soil composition and seasonal planting schedules until the rain finally subsides and he rises with obvious relief, claiming the need to return home before dark. At the door, however, he pauses, turning to study Elias one final time with an intensity that makes the boy step backward involuntarily. Your hands, Edwin says quietly. They have the gardener's touch already, the knowing of how things grow best. His gaze drifts to Miss Clara, communicating something unspoken before returning to Elias. Some plants recognize the hands that tend them, boy, respond only to certain bloodlines, bloom only for their true masters. Remember that when the blue roses open. Summer sunshine bathes the castle courtyard in golden light, as Elias stands motionless before the miracle unfolding across the carefully tended beds, his hands still grimy from the morning's work, but now hanging limply at his sides as he struggles to comprehend the explosion of color and form that has appeared overnight, as though conjured by some ancient magic. The Aldridge blue roses have unfurled their first blooms, revealing petals of a color never before seen in nature, a blue so deep and pure it seems to capture the very essence of the mountain sky, their centers gradating to an almost luminescent silver that catches the light like crushed diamonds. While nearby, the silver vines have produced star-shaped flowers with delicate tendrils that seem to reach toward Elias when he moves, tracking his presence like living creatures rather than plants. Thomas, who has become Elias's unexpected ally in the restoration work, arriving each morning with tools and increasingly genuine interest, drops the water bucket he has been carrying, his mouth forming a perfect circle of astonishment as he stares at the botanical impossibility spreading across the courtyard in waves of color and shape that defy conventional understanding of what flowers should be. "They are like something from a fairy tale," he whispers, reaching hesitantly toward a cluster of lilies whose petals shimmer with an iridescence that shifts colors depending on the viewing angle, only to withdraw his fingers quickly when the blossoms seem to close slightly at his approach. The boy's wonder is interrupted by a sharp intake of breath from the courtyard entrance, where Mr. Edwin stands leaning heavily on a gnarled walking stick, his weathered face drained of color as he takes in the scene before him, eyes widening with recognition and something deeper, something close to fear, as he limps forward to inspect the blue roses with trembling hands that hover above the blooms without touching them. "Impossible," he murmurs, shaking his head in disbelief while moving from one plant variety to another with increasing agitation. The blood recognition strains were never supposed to germinate again. Not after all this time, not without. His voice trails off as he turns to stare at Elias with an intensity that makes the boy step backward involuntarily. "Boy, did you plant these with your own hands? Tend them yourself?" Edwin demands, gnarled finger pointing accusingly at the thriving plants. When Elias nods, explaining his careful following of the journal instructions, the old gardener's expression shifts through complex emotions before settling into grim confirmation. These varieties were created over generations by the Aldridge family. He explains in a low voice that forces both boys to lean closer. "Engineered to recognize the touch of Aldridge blood through methods I never fully understood, dormant to all others, responding only to the family's direct descendants. A living security system of sorts to identify the true heir should disputes ever arise." Edwin's eyes narrow as he studies Elias's features with new intensity. "In 50 years, I've never seen these blue roses bloom. Not since the night the family vanished and the young heir was." He stops abruptly, looking around as though suddenly aware he has said too much. "These plants know who you are, even if you don't yet understand it yourself," he concludes cryptically, reaching into his pocket to remove a handkerchief and carefully snipping one perfect blue rose, wrapping it with reverent care before tucking it away. "There are those who would destroy these plants if they knew they bloomed again, those who thought all traces of Aldridge blood had been eliminated long ago, those who will not be pleased to learn they were mistaken." The village square transforms with the arrival of 3 black SUVs that park with military precision before the inn, disgorging men and women in business attire who seem oddly disconnected from the rural setting, like creatures from another world with their crisp suits, digital tablets, and the perpetual glow of mobile phones pressed to ears despite the notoriously poor reception in the mountain valley. Whispers spread quickly through the small community as villagers observe the strangers conducting what appears to be a methodical assessment, measuring distances with laser devices, taking soil samples from public areas, photographing vistas in all directions with professional cameras mounted on tripods positioned for optimal views of the mountain and forest that have defined life here for generations. Elias, returning from the castle with Max trotting faithfully beside him, pauses at the edge of the gathering crowd, watching with growing unease as a woman in a charcoal pantsuit unfurls large architectural renderings on a table outside the inn, gesturing expansively while speaking to the village mayor and council members whose expressions range from skepticism to poorly concealed interest. Blackstone Development envisions transforming this underutilized area into a world-class mountain resort, she announces in a voice pitched to carry across the square, her practiced smile never reaching calculating eyes. Luxury accommodations, spa facilities, helicopter access for discerning clientele, all while preserving the rustic charm that makes this region so special. When the blacksmith raises concerns about local impact, another representative steps forward, a man with silver temples and a diamond tie pin that catches the afternoon sunlight. "We're prepared to offer significant compensation to affected landowners, plus employment opportunities for locals during and after construction, he assures the crowd with practiced smoothness. Blackstone Development has a reputation for responsible alpine resort creation across 3 continents. The discussion continues with questions about water rights and property boundaries until an older councilman mentions the castle ruins, describing them as a crumbling eyesore of no historical value, suggesting their removal would improve the mountain aesthetics. At this, the woman's professional demeanor slips momentarily, revealing intense interest quickly masked behind casual inquiry. Our research indicated some ancient ruins existed in the area. She acknowledges with studied nonchalance that fails to disguise the sudden sharpness in her gaze. We'd certainly want to evaluate their historical significance before any decisions about preservation or removal. Her companion nods agreement while subtly signaling to a third team member who immediately begins, tapping notes into a tablet with renewed urgency. From his position on the periphery, Elias notices Mr. Aldridge emerging from the inn to observe the proceedings, his posture suggesting ownership rather than curiosity, as he surveys both the development team and the villagers with the detached assessment of a chess player evaluating pieces on a board, his eyes eventually finding Elias in the crowd with an expression of such calculated interest that the boy instinctively steps back into the shadow of a nearby building, a chill running through him despite the summer warmth. Later that evening, Thomas arrives breathless at Miss Clara's cottage, where Elias is helping prepare herbs for drying, reporting that the development representatives have specifically asked about the orphan boy who spends time at the castle, offering rewards for information about his activities there and the current condition of the ruins that have suddenly become central to their mountain survey. Midday heat shimmers above the courtyard stones as Elias works methodically to restore the central fountain, carefully removing decades of debris from the basin while following the detailed diagrams in the journal that show how water once flowed through carved channels to create patterns and sounds now silenced by time and neglect. Thomas has returned to the village for supplies, leaving Elias alone with his thoughts and the comforting presence of Max, who dozes in a patch of shade cast by the blue roses that continue to thrive with unnatural vigor, their blooms turning subtly to track the boy's movements throughout the garden like silent sentinels. Elias chips away at a particularly stubborn section of mineral buildup inside the fountain's central column, his chisel dislodging calcified layers to reveal the original stone beneath, when a metallic sound rings out as his tool strikes something embedded within the accumulated deposits. Curiosity piqued, he works more carefully around the object, gradually freeing what appears to be a small metal disc from its stony prison, its surface tarnished almost beyond recognition after decades trapped within the fountain's damp interior. Using the corner of his shirt, Elias gently polishes the object, revealing intricate engravings beneath the patina and a small clasp on one side that suggests a locket rather than a simple medallion like the one he already carries. With fingers trembling slightly from either fatigue or anticipation, he carefully works the ancient clasp until it yields with a soft click, the locket falling open in his palm to reveal its hidden contents protected from water and time by the tight seal of its craftsmanship. A tiny portrait painted on ivory stares back at him, the colors still vibrant despite their age, depicting a child of perhaps 4 or 5 with solemn blue-gray eyes and a serious expression that sends a shock of recognition through Elias's entire body. For the face in the miniature is unmistakably his own at a younger age, from the unusual eye color to the distinctive arch of eyebrows and the small cleft in his chin. Breath caught in his throat, Elias turns the locket over to find ornate initials engraved on the reverse side. E.A. surrounded by delicate scrollwork and the now familiar tree and castle crest that has become a recurring motif in his discoveries. The implications cascade through his mind like the water that once flowed through this fountain, connections forming between disparate pieces of a puzzle. The journal addressed to a son and heir, the portrait in the hidden chamber, Miss Clara's cryptic comments about his arrival in the village, the plants that respond only to Aldridge blood, and now this locket bearing his initials and his exact likeness from a time before his first memories. The weight of possibility settles over him with the physical presence of truth too long denied, a truth that explains the sense of belonging he has felt since discovering the castle, the instinctive knowledge of its layout, the connection to gardens he has never seen in bloom yet somehow remembers in dreams that have haunted him throughout childhood. Still clutching the open locket, Elias sinks onto the fountain's edge as Max approaches to rest his head on the boy's knee, offering silent comfort as tears begin to track silently down dusty cheeks. Tears not of sorrow but of revelation, of a lost child beginning to find his way home through fragments of a past, deliberately hidden from him for reasons still shrouded in mystery but now impossible to ignore. The late summer sun beats down relentlessly as Elias and Thomas crouch over the journal spread between them on a flat stone, studying a complex network of lines that resembles veins in a living organism more than any water system either boy has encountered. The detailed diagrams annotated with measurements and flow calculations in the same meticulous hand that documented the garden varieties. According to this, there should be an access point beneath the eastern terrace. Elias murmurs, tracing a finger along a path that leads from a mountain spring through a series of channels to feed the courtyard fountains and garden irrigation systems. The boys exchange determined glances before gathering their tools and making their way to a section of the castle grounds they have previously neglected, an overgrown area where crumbling steps lead down to a terrace now barely distinguishable from the surrounding wilderness. Hours of careful excavation reveal a stone slab, partially hidden beneath decades of soil and vegetation, its surface carved with the familiar Aldridge crest that has become their guide through the castle's secrets. With straining muscles and makeshift levers fashioned from fallen branches, they gradually shift the heavy cover to expose a dark opening and the top rungs of a stone ladder descending into shadow. "I will go first," Elias declares, lighting the oil lamp they have restored from the hidden chamber's supplies, his voice betraying excitement rather than fear, as he lowers himself into the unknown depths with Thomas following close behind. Both boys blinking as their eyes adjust to the dimness, relieved only by the warm glow of their single lamp. What they discover beneath the castle foundations leaves them speechless with wonder. A vast network of tunnels lined with fitted stone extending in multiple directions like the diagram come to life. Channels of varying sizes carved with mathematical precision to control water flow through the entire castle system. "This is impossible," Thomas whispers, his voice echoing slightly in the underground chamber. "My father is the village engineer, and he says nothing this sophisticated exists in modern buildings, let alone something built centuries ago." Following the main channel, they discover a series of mechanical gates designed to regulate water distribution. Intricate mechanisms of metal and stone that should have deteriorated long ago yet remain functional beneath accumulations of mineral deposits, their design so elegant in its simplicity that the boys can determine their operation without instruction. With newfound purpose, they spend days clearing blockages from the primary channels, scraping away calcification from the metal components, marveling at the system's ingenious use of gravity and natural pressure to distribute water throughout the entire castle complex, without pumps or modern equipment. When they finally locate the connection to the mountain spring that once fed the system, hidden behind a false rock face halfway up the eastern slope, they work feverishly to clear the inlet, excitement building as they remove the final obstruction, and are rewarded with the sound of water beginning to trickle through the ancient channels for the first time in decades. That evening, as golden light bathes the courtyard in amber hues, the boys stand transfixed before the central fountain where water has begun to rise through the restored pipework. A thin stream at first, that gradually strengthens until it bursts from the central spout in a glittering arc that catches the sunset in countless diamond facets before falling musically into the basin below. "We did it." Thomas breathes, amazement evident in his expression as he watches the water flow through channels they have painstakingly cleared, following paths laid out generations before their birth, with an engineering precision that defies their understanding of what should be possible. "Not just us," Elias replies softly, his hand unconsciously moving to touch the locket now hanging around his neck beside the medallion, both tangible connections to a heritage he is only beginning to understand. "We just woke something that was sleeping." The crunch of expensive shoes on gravel alerts Elias to unwelcome visitors long before they appear at the courtyard entrance, giving him just enough time to signal Max to remain hidden behind the partially restored garden wall, where the dog crouches with hackles raised, sensing his master's sudden tension. 3 figures emerge from the castle ruins into the sunlit courtyard, their tailored suits and polished leather accessories incongruous against the ancient stones and flourishing gardens. The woman from the village presentation, flanked by 2 men whose broad shoulders and watchful eyes suggest they serve purposes beyond business consultation. "So this is where you've been playing gardener," the woman remarks, her professional smile never reaching cold eyes that survey the restoration work with calculated assessment rather than appreciation. Gaze lingering on the blue roses whose color seems to deepen as though responding to the threat of her presence. Quite impressive for a child. though ultimately futile, given the circumstances. When Elias remains silent, continuing to tend the silver vine with deliberate focus that masks his racing heart, the taller of the men steps forward to place a heavy hand on his shoulder, fingers digging with just enough pressure to communicate dominance without leaving visible marks. "Miss Patterson asked you a question, boy," he says, voice deceptively soft despite the implied threat in his grip. "It's rude not to answer when adults are speaking to you." Forcing himself to appear calmer than he feels, Elias straightens to his full height, shrugging away from the man's grasp with a confidence that momentarily surprises the trio before Miss Patterson regains her composure, producing documents from her leather portfolio with practiced efficiency. Blackstone Development has already begun acquisition proceedings for this entire mountain sector, she explains, gesturing expansively at the surrounding landscape. "This includes these ruins, which, frankly, pose a safety hazard and will need to be demolished for the Alpine Resort project that will bring prosperity to your little village." Her companions move to opposite sides of the courtyard in a flanking maneuver that feels rehearsed, cutting off potential escape routes while she continues her practiced speech about progress and economic opportunity, explaining that Elias's presence constitutes trespassing on what will soon be private property. When the boy finally speaks, pointing out that the castle already belongs to someone, that restoration rather than destruction would preserve history, Miss Patterson's professional demeanor cracks slightly, revealing irritation beneath the corporate veneer. "Listen carefully, because I will only explain this once," she says, voice hardening as she steps closer. "This property has no legal owner on record. The Aldridge line ended generations ago. And our company has the resources to ensure all acquisition paperwork processes smoothly, regardless of any sentimental attachments local children might have developed." As if to punctuate her words, one of the men casually kicks over a carefully arranged stone border, sending rocks tumbling into a bed of newly transplanted seedlings, while his companion moves toward the fountain, deliberately toppling a restored statue that shatters against the flagstones with a crack that echoes through the courtyard like a gunshot. "Consider this a friendly warning, Miss," Patterson concludes, brushing invisible dust from her sleeve while surveying the destruction with clinical detachment. "Children who play in construction zones tend to have unfortunate accidents, and it would be truly tragic if something happened to you or that dog I hear growling behind the wall before you have a chance to grow up." With a final, meaningful glance at the blue roses now fully turned toward Elias as though offering silent support, she gestures to her companions and turns to leave, calling over her shoulder with chilling finality. "We begin preliminary site assessment tomorrow. I suggest you find somewhere else to play gardener before then." News of the confrontation spreads through the village with the speed and force of mountain floodwaters after Thomas returns home in a state of righteous indignation, recounting to his parents how corporate strangers threatened a child and deliberately destroyed weeks of careful restoration work simply to demonstrate their power. By morning, the blacksmith's wife has organized a meeting in the village square where voices rise in concerned debate, not just about the castle that most have long ignored, but about the implications of outside developers claiming mountain land that has defined their community for generations, threatening to transform their quiet existence into a playground for the wealthy while treating locals with callous disregard. They smashed a 500-year-old statue just to frighten a boy, Thomas's father announces, his position as village engineer lending weight to his words. What else will they destroy once they own the mountain? Miss Clara stands silently at the edge of the gathering, watching with knowing eyes as the discussion shifts from initial skepticism about Elias's castle project to growing concern about preserving their heritage against corporate encroachment. Her weathered face revealing subtle satisfaction when the baker pounds his fist on a table and declares that no outsider should dictate the fate of their mountain, regardless of their wealth or power. When Elias arrives at the castle the following day, exhausted from another night of troubled sleep haunted by dreams of destruction, he stops short at the edge of the courtyard, momentarily unable to comprehend the scene before him. The blacksmith and his apprentice carefully reassembling the shattered statue, using techniques from their metalwork. The carpenter and his sons repairing the damaged garden borders with improved supports that will prevent future vandalism. Village women planting new seedlings to replace those destroyed, while Thomas proudly gives tours of their water system discovery to impressed adults who had previously dismissed the castle as worthless ruins. "We thought you could use some help," the baker explained simply, handing Elias a basket of fresh bread and cheese that represents more food than his rotating guardians typically provide in several days. These mountains belonged to all of us before these corporation people arrived with their papers and promises. Throughout the day, more villagers arrive with tools and supplies, some working silently alongside Elias, while others pepper him with questions about the castle's history and his restoration plans, genuine interest replacing the dismissive attitudes that have defined his village existence for as long as he can remember. When the elderly schoolteacher gasps in wonder at the impossible blue of the Aldridge roses, suggesting the flowers alone represent botanical history worth preserving, Elias feels something shift within his chest. A cautious unfurling of trust where only wariness existed before. By evening, as golden sunlight bathes the expanded workforce in amber light, the transformation extends beyond the physical repairs to something more profound in the collective attitude of villagers, who now speak of our castle and our heritage, while making plans for continued assistance with the restoration project. They wanted to frighten you away, miss. Clara observes quietly as she joins Elias beside the fountain that now flows more strongly thanks to additional hands clearing the underground channels. Instead, they have given this community something it has lacked for too long. A shared purpose that honors the past while protecting the future. Her gnarled fingers brush his shoulder with surprising tenderness before she adds words that resonate with unexpected meaning. Sometimes true inheritance is not just what we receive, but what we choose to preserve for those who will follow us. Autumn colors paint the mountainside as Elias sits alone in the restored courtyard after the villagers have departed for the day, the journal open on his lap as it has been countless times before. Yet tonight his fingers trace the binding with new purpose, seeking answers rather than garden plans, identity rather than instruction. For weeks now, between restoration work and defending against Blackstone's increasingly aggressive land surveys, he has studied every aspect of the journal, memorizing passages and diagrams, while searching for any clue about his connection to this place and the family whose blood seems to flow in his veins according to flowers that bloom at his touch. Running his fingers along the spine for the 100th time, he notices a slight irregularity in the leather binding, a subtle thickening near the back cover that seems inconsistent with the rest of the craftsmanship. And with careful pressure applied to what appears to be a decorative element in the design, he feels something give way with a soft click. The back cover itself splits slightly, revealing a hidden compartment crafted with such precision that it has remained undetected through all his previous examinations. And from this secret space, Elias withdraws several folded pages of heavy parchment. The paper yellowed with age, but the ink still clearly legible, bearing an official seal in legal language that marks it immediately as something of profound importance. His hands tremble slightly as he unfolds the document, recognizing immediately the formal declaration at the top. Last will and testament of Lord Frederick Aldridge, dated mere days before the family's mysterious disappearance 50 years ago. Eyes scanning the dense legal text, Elias feels his breath catch as he reads passages designating the distribution of assets and property, culminating in the crucial line that changes everything. The entirety of Aldridge Castle, its grounds and all associated holdings are bequeathed to my son, Elias Aldridge, to be held in trust until his 21st year should anything befall me before that time. Further paragraphs detail provisions for guardianship and protection of the heir, with specific instructions that, should threats arise against the Aldridge line, my trusted housemaid, Clara Winters, is authorized to remove my son to safety until such time as he may safely reclaim his birthright. The world seems to tilt beneath Elias as the fragments of his fractured existence suddenly align into coherent truth, his abandonment revealed as an act not of rejection but of desperate protection, his placement in the village, not a discarding, but a hiding, orchestrated by Miss Clara herself, who has watched over him from a distance while keeping his true identity secret even from him. Tears blur his vision as he continues reading, discovering his father's final written words. To my son, should you read this in my absence, know that you were loved beyond measure, that your safety was purchased at great cost, and that your inheritance awaits your return when the threat has passed, marked by the blooming of the blood recognition roses that will proclaim your rightful claim to all who understand their significance. Clutching the will to his chest, Elias sits motionless as evening shadows lengthen across the courtyard, the reality of his existence transforming with each heartbeat from orphaned village burden to hidden heir, protected by secrecy and sacrifice rather than abandoned through indifference. His entire life, a carefully orchestrated refuge rather than the random consequence of parental rejection he has believed for as long as he can remember. The blue roses seem to glow with unusual intensity in the fading light, as though celebrating the truth finally revealed, while Max rests his head on his master's knee in silent companionship, as Elias whispers words that taste both strange and familiar on his tongue. Testing their reality in the autumn air. I am Elias Aldridge, and this is my home. Rain pounds against the windows of Miss Clara's cottage, as Elias sits across from her at the small wooden table, the will spread between them like a bridge spanning the chasm between his past and present. His voice barely audible above the storm as he asks the question that has haunted him since discovering the document. You knew all along, didn't you? The old woman stares at the familiar handwriting on the parchment, her weathered fingers hovering above Lord Aldridge's signature without quite touching it, as though the contact might burn after so many years of secrets and silence. Yes, she finally admits, her eyes lifting to meet his with a mixture of relief and apprehension. I was lady's maid to your mother for 15 years before you were born, and nursemaid to you afterward. Trusted with your care from your first breath. Words long held back now flow from her like the rain outside, describing the Aldridge family with intimate knowledge. The gentle mother with her passion for botany who created the blue roses through years of careful breeding. The serious but kind father whose engineering brilliance designed the water systems that still function decades later. And the childhood paradise they created for their beloved son, in a castle filled with books and music and gardens that bloomed year-round through scientific innovation ahead of its time. The night everything changed. Your parents had discovered something in the family accounts, she continues, voice dropping to barely above a whisper as lightning illuminates the cottage in brief, ghostly flashes. Substantial funds missing, properties sold without authorization. All traced to your father's younger brother who had been systematically stealing from the family for years while presenting himself as the loyal business manager. The fire crackles in the small hearth as Miss Clara describes the confrontation that followed, the threats exchanged, the brother departing in cold fury, only to return after midnight with hired men who moved through the castle with brutal efficiency. Your father woke me, thrust you into my arms along with the medallion and journal, and begged me to hide you at any cost, she recounts, tears now flowing freely down her lined face. I escaped through the servants' passage as the sound of violence echoed through the halls, carrying you wrapped in a blanket through the winter night to the village where I claimed you were an abandoned child. Knowing your uncle would search for any Aldridge heir, but never suspect a common orphan left on church steps, the truth of his parents' fate lies unspoken between them. The knowledge that they sacrificed themselves to create the distraction that allowed his escape, choosing his survival over their own with the desperate hope that someday he might reclaim what was rightfully his. I have watched over you all these years, moving between village homes as your guardian to prevent suspicion, waiting for signs it might be safe for you to know the truth. Miss Clara finishes, reaching across the table to grasp his trembling hand with surprising strength in her age-worn fingers. When you found the castle, when the roses began to bloom, I knew the time had finally come, but I never expected your uncle to return after all these years, never imagined he would still pursue the land with such determination. Understanding floods through Elias with the force of the restored castle fountains. Connections forming between disparate pieces of memory and experience. The stranger whose arrival precipitated Blackstone's interest in the mountain. The familiar features that villagers remarked upon. The calculated gaze that followed him through the village square, all suddenly coalescing into a single, chilling realization. Mr. Aldridge from Blackstone Development, he whispers, the name now carrying the weight of blood and betrayal. He's not just a businessman interested in the mountain, is he? Miss Clara shakes her head slowly, fear and determination mingling in her tired eyes. He is your father's brother, returned to claim what he believes should have been his, what he has spent 50 years believing was finally his alone. Golden morning light bathes the mountain path as Elias makes his way to the castle, his mind still processing Miss Clara's revelations about his true parentage, and the uncle whose decades-long pursuit of Aldridge holdings has apparently led him back to the mountain village, back to the nephew whose existence threatens his claim to land he believes rightfully his. Something feels wrong the moment Elias crests the final rise before the castle. An unnatural silence where the musical splash of fountains should greet him, and his pace quickens instinctively, dread building with each step until he stands frozen at the courtyard entrance, confronted by destruction so thorough it momentarily steals his breath. The garden beds lie in ruins, plants uprooted and scattered across muddy ground, the blue roses crushed and trampled with particular viciousness that suggests personal hatred rather than casual vandalism. While the fountain stands dry and broken, its restored mechanisms visibly damaged by tools designed for destruction rather than creation. Max growls beside him, hackles raised as he moves cautiously through the devastation, nose working furiously at scents that bring his teeth bearing in uncharacteristic aggression, while Elias forces himself forward on numb legs to assess damage that extends beyond the visible chaos. For water pools around the terrace where access to the underground system reveals even more deliberate sabotage. Descending the stone ladder with shaking hands, Elias finds the elegant water channels choked with debris deliberately introduced to block flow. Metal control gates wrenched from their settings. Careful engineering destroyed with methodical thoroughness that speaks of both technical knowledge and overwhelming spite. Hours of frantic work reveal the full extent of the damage. Primary water lines severed at crucial junctures, control mechanisms smashed beyond simple repair, and most devastating, the mountain spring connection dynamited closed in an act of destruction that will require weeks of work to restore, even with village help. When Thomas arrives shortly before noon, his father and several other villagers following close behind, their collective outrage provides momentary comfort, but Elias finds himself retreating into a cold silence that frightens his friend more than tears would have. A calculating stillness that suggests something fundamental shifting within the orphan boy, who now understands exactly what has been taken from him, and by whom. As the adults discuss potential repairs, Max suddenly lifts his head from examining a distinctive bootprint in the mud, nose twitching before he bolts toward the mountain path with purpose that compels Elias to follow despite exhaustion from hours of cleanup. Trailing his dog down familiar paths toward the village below, where Max moves with increasing certainty, tracking an invisible trail through back alleys and kitchen gardens until he stops before the village inn. Growling softly with his attention fixed on a ground-floor window, where voices can be heard discussing schedules and permits, the polished tones of Miss Patterson mingling with a deeper male voice that issues instructions about finishing the job properly this time. Elias crouches beside Max in the shadows of a nearby shed, rage and determination crystallizing into something harder and more focused than the grief of a child. Something that carries echoes of the father he cannot remember but whose blood runs in his veins, whose legacy now depends on a son believed long lost, but who has finally returned to reclaim what was violently taken, a son who now understands that the paradise he sought to rebuild must first be defended against those who would destroy it forever. Autumn leaves scatter across the village square as Mr. Holloway, the elderly lawyer who has served the mountain community for 40 years, emerges from the regional courthouse with Elias and Miss Clara, a thin folder of legal documents clutched in his arthritic hands, and quiet satisfaction evident in his rheumy eyes. Despite his professional reserve, the claim has been officially filed. He confirms in his methodical way, the words carrying weight beyond their simplicity, as he explains how the discovered will, combined with the medallion, locket, and Miss Delacy, Clara's sworn testimony, create a legal foundation for Elias's identity as the Aldridge heir and rightful owner of the castle and surrounding lands, effectively halting any development plans until ownership can be determined by proper authorities. Word spreads through the village with remarkable speed, faces appearing in windows and doorways as the three make their way back toward Miss Clara's cottage, some villagers offering quiet nods of support, while others whisper behind cupped hands about the audacity of an orphan boy challenging wealthy developers with nothing but ancient papers and wild claims of noble heritage. The confrontation they all anticipate arrives sooner than expected when 3 black SUVs roar into the village that same afternoon, coming to an abrupt halt before the inn where Mr. Duddle Holloway has established a temporary office. Their synchronized arrival creating a momentary hush across the square as villagers pause in their daily tasks to watch events unfold with the collective tension of audience members at a theatrical performance reaching its climax. The man who emerges from the lead vehicle moves with the confidence of someone accustomed to immediate deference, his tailored suit and silver hair immaculate despite the long journey, his features sharpened by decades of ambition, yet still carrying the unmistakable Aldridge characteristics that have become familiar to the village through Elias's presence. Now seen in mature form with cold calculation replacing the boy's earnest determination. I understand someone has filed a spurious claim against my company's legitimate business interests. he announces without preamble as he strides into the makeshift office where Elias sits beside Mr. Holloway, his voice carrying the cultured accent of international business rather than local roots despite his family's long connection to these mountains. The moment his gaze falls upon Elias, something flickers briefly across his composed features, a complex emotion quickly suppressed beneath professional disdain as he studies the boy's face with the critical assessment of someone confirming a threat rather than recognizing family. "So this is the village orphan claiming Aldridge blood," he remarks with calculated dismissiveness, though his eyes never leave Elias's face, cataloging the familial resemblance with growing tension evident in his tightening jaw. When Mr. Holloway calmly presents the will and supporting documentation, explaining the legal procedure now in motion, the man who has introduced himself as Richard Aldridge, CEO of Blackstone Development, listens with manufactured patience before producing his own sheaf of papers from an Italian leather briefcase. "I have here death certificates from my brother, his wife, and their only child, issued 50 years ago after the tragic accident that claimed their lives." He counters smoothly, though something in his delivery suggests lines rehearsed many times before various officials. "Whatever resemblance this boy might coincidentally bear to my family, whatever documents you believe authentic, the legal record has been clear for half a century, which makes me the sole surviving Aldridge and rightful heir to all associated properties." The atmosphere in the small room grows charged with unspoken history as uncle and nephew regard each other across decades of deception and loss. The older man's confidence momentarily wavering when Elias wordlessly removes the locket from around his neck and opens it to reveal the portrait inside. A piece of evidence not included in the legal filing but whose existence clearly unsettles the polished executive who recognizes it with poorly concealed shock. Gray clouds gather above the castle as Elias works alone in the partially restored courtyard, the blue roses beginning to close their blooms against the approaching storm when the sound of expensive shoes on ancient flagstones announces his uncle's arrival, the older man moving through the ruins with the proprietary confidence of someone who believes ownership already secured despite legal challenges and local resistance. "Impressive work for a child," Richard Aldridge remarks, surveying the restoration efforts with clinical detachment rather than appreciation, his tailored overcoat fluttering slightly in the rising wind as he circles the courtyard like a predator assessing prey, stopping before the blue roses with narrowed eyes that recognize their significance despite decades of absence from the castle grounds. "Those flowers were always my brother's pride, proof of Aldridge genius," he claimed, "though I found them unnecessarily sentimental for a family focused on empire building." The casual reference to Elias's father hangs in the air between them, an acknowledgement more revealing than any legal document could be. And when Elias remains silent, continuing to carefully prune damaged plants with steady hands despite his racing heart, his uncle laughs without humor. "You have his stubborn silence too, that infuriating moral superiority Frederick always wore like armor when questioning my business methods, even when evidence of his hypocrisy was undeniable." Moving closer, Richard removes a silver flask from his coat pocket, taking a measured sip before continuing with calculated casualness, as though discussing market fluctuations rather than family annihilation. He discovered the discrepancies in the accounts, of course, always the meticulous one checking ledgers most owners would leave to accountants, threatening to expose what he called my betrayal unless I returned everything and left the family business forever. The older man's voice hardens as he recounts that final confrontation 50 years ago, describing how hired men were instructed merely to frighten the family into compliance, how resistance escalated to violence never officially sanctioned, yet conveniently eliminating obstacles to his ambition, how death certificates were easily obtained with sufficient financial persuasion when bodies could not be found to confirm their demise. "The ultimate irony," he continues, lips twisting into a smile that never reaches cold eyes, was discovering years later that the mountain property held mineral deposits worth exponentially more than the diverted funds that started this entire regrettable situation. Wealth my brother never recognized while playing gardener in his mountain paradise. With calculated precision, Richard withdraws an envelope from his coat, placing it on the stone bench beside Elias with the casual confidence of someone accustomed to problems resolving themselves when sufficient money is applied. €2 million and a new identity in any country you choose. Documentation arranged by my people with no questions asked, he offers, voice dropping to a confidential murmur despite their isolation. A generous future in exchange for your disappearance and the withdrawal of all legal claims. certainly more than an orphan raised in mountain poverty could imagine spending in several lifetimes. Lightning flashes across the darkening sky, momentarily illuminating the courtyard in stark relief as Elias finally looks directly at his uncle, seeing in the older man's features the ghost of his own face, aged by decades of ruthless ambition rather than integrity, by calculated cruelty rather than the courage that led his parents to sacrifice themselves for their child's survival. "The blue roses only bloom for Aldridge blood," Elias replies quietly, his voice steady despite the storm building both around and within him, "which means they recognize me as the rightful heir to everything you thought destroyed 50 years ago." His uncle's expression hardens into something dangerous as he realizes persuasion has failed, his hand moving subtly toward his coat pocket, with purpose that suggests negotiations have concluded and more permanent solutions now occupy his thoughts. Thunder rumbles across the mountain as Richard Aldridge's expression transforms from calculated persuasion to cold fury, the mask of civilized businessmen slipping to reveal something predatory beneath when Elias pushes the envelope away with quiet determination, stating simply that no amount of money could purchase his birthright or erase the truth of what happened to his parents. "You are making the same foolish choice your father made." Richard snarls, advancing toward his nephew with menace that needs no verbal elaboration, his hand emerging from his pocket with the metallic gleam of a small pistol that catches the fading light. Some problems cannot be solved through negotiation or legal channels, a lesson the original Aldridges learned too late. The threat hangs in the air between them, uncle and nephew locked in a tableau of confrontation that echoes across half a century of deception and loss. When the sound of multiple footsteps on the castle path breaks the tension, drawing both their attention to the courtyard entrance where Thomas appears first, followed by his father, the blacksmith, the baker, and a stream of villagers armed with tools and lanterns against the gathering darkness. Richard steps back in momentary confusion as more villagers file into the courtyard, forming a protective semicircle around Elias with the instinctive coordination of a community united by common purpose, their normally gentle faces set with mountain determination as they position themselves between the boy and the perceived threat. "We heard you might need some help with the evening work," the blacksmith announces casually, though his massive arms crossed over his chest suggest purposes beyond garden labor. His gaze fixed on the pistol now hastily returned to Richard's pocket. "Miss." Clara pushes through the gathering crowd, taking her place beside Elias with surprising steadiness in her aged frame, her voice carrying clearly as she addresses Richard directly. "They know everything now. About the night you came with hired men, about the family you thought eliminated, about the heir you believed lost forever." Murmurs of confirmation ripple through the assembled villagers, faces hardening with each revelation as the orphan boy they once overlooked is transformed in their collective understanding to the surviving victim of calculated violence against a family whose castle has stood watch over their mountain. "For centuries, this castle belongs to the mountains, and the boy belongs to us," Thomas's father declares, the village engineer speaking with the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. "Blackstone Development is not welcome here regardless of what surname you carry or what papers you produce." Richard surveys the crowd with the cold assessment of someone calculating odds and finding them unexpectedly unfavorable, his corporate confidence visibly wavering against the wall of community resolve that has materialized in defense of castle and heir, his gaze shifting between faces that show no signs of intimidation despite his wealth and power. "You are making a serious mistake interfering in matters beyond your understanding," he warns, adjusting his expensive overcoat with forced casualness that fails to mask his retreat toward the courtyard exit. "This isn't over." The village baker steps forward, his normally jovial face solemn as gathering darkness casts dramatic shadows across the courtyard. "Actually, I believe it is," he responds, gesturing toward the mountain path where the distinctive uniform of regional police can be seen approaching through the trees, summoned by Mr. Holloway with evidence of trespassing, destruction of property, and now, attempted intimidation with an unregistered weapon. Rain begins to fall as the standoff intensifies, fat drops striking ancient stones with increasing urgency, while Max, sensing his master's distress, circles the courtyard with growing agitation, his normally obedient demeanor giving way to instinctive protectiveness that manifests in restless movement and occasional low growls directed at Richard Aldridge. The dog's nervous energy leads him to pace along the partially restored fountain, where water once again flows through channels cleaned by villagers' hands, his paws scrabbling at the decorative base with increasing determination until a section of ornately carved stone shifts unexpectedly. The grinding sound of ancient mechanisms drawing all eyes as a previously invisible seam appears in what had seemed solid foundation. Richard pales visibly at the sound, his composed facade cracking to reveal genuine alarm as Max continues his frantic digging, revealing what appears to be a small lever concealed within the stonework that, when displaced by the dog's persistent paws, triggers a larger mechanism, causing a section of the courtyard floor to slide away, revealing stone steps descending into darkness below. Elias moves forward instinctively, followed closely by Thomas and several villagers with lanterns held high, illuminating a chamber that has remained sealed for 50 years, untouched by time or intruders, its contents protected from the elements by the same engineering genius that created the castle's remarkable water systems. Wooden crates stacked with methodical precision occupy the center of the hidden vault, surrounded by metal containers bearing the Aldridge crest. But what draws Elias forward with trembling steps is a large leather portfolio resting atop a stone pedestal, its surface free of dust as though placed there yesterday rather than decades ago. With careful hands, he lifts the portfolio and opens it to reveal documents organized with meticulous care. Accounting ledgers showing systematic theft from family holdings with Richard's signature on transfer authorizations, correspondence between Richard and men hired for permanent problem resolution at the castle, and most damning, a detailed contingency plan written in Richard's own hand describing how to eliminate the entire Aldridge family while establishing himself as sole heir to their considerable holdings. "Your father anticipated your betrayal," Miss Clara explains softly as Richard's face contorts with the realization of what has been discovered. "He prepared this vault the week before you came, gathering evidence of your crimes along with the family fortune that had been converted to gold and precious stones, placing everything where only his son could find it if the worst happened." As the regional police step forward to examine the incriminating documents, villagers open the crates to reveal gleaming stacks of gold bars, leather pouches of uncut diamonds, and artifact collections whose value exceeds anything they have seen in their modest lives, wealth that has waited patiently through decades for its rightful owner to return. Richard lunges suddenly toward the vault entrance with desperate determination, only to find his path blocked by the solid wall of villagers whose collective protection has transformed from metaphorical to literal, their faces resolute as police officers move forward with handcuffs while explaining charges that span from historical fraud to contemporary sabotage, from conspiracy to attempted assault, crimes whose evidence has emerged from stone, as though the castle itself has finally spoken its truth after half a century of patient silence. Autumn gives way to winter, as justice unfolds with the measured pace of legal proceedings rather than the dramatic confrontations that preceded it. Richard Aldridge's arrest at the castle merely the first step in a process that exposes decades of criminal activity through meticulous examination of the vault documents. Financial forensics revealing a web of fraud that extends far beyond the mountain village to international markets, where the Blackstone CEO has operated with impunity until now. Snow falls on the village courthouse, where journalists gather from regional papers to document the unprecedented case of an orphan boy, revealed as the lost heir to one of the country's oldest estates, their cameras capturing the moment when Richard Aldridge, stripped of his tailored suits and corporate authority, is led away in prisoner transport to begin serving a sentence that ensures he will never again walk free, his crimes deemed too numerous and calculated for leniency, despite expensive lawyers who argue that evidence buried for 50 years should be considered inadmissible. In the judge's chambers, Mr. Holloway presents the final authentication reports confirming the will's legitimacy, the medallion's provenance, and most conclusively, DNA tests comparing samples from Elias, Richard, and preserved hairbrushes found in the castle's master bedroom, science providing irrefutable confirmation of what the Blue Roses recognized from the beginning. Aldridge blood flows in Elias's veins, making him the sole surviving direct descendant and rightful heir to everything his parents sought to protect through their ultimate sacrifice. The court recognizes Elias Aldridge as the legitimate heir to the Aldridge estate, including all lands, properties, and holdings as detailed in the authenticated will of Lord Frederick Aldridge. The judge announces, her voice carrying the weight of authority as she signs documents that transform an orphan boy into one of the wealthiest young men in the region, while specifically noting that the extensive mountain lands surrounding the castle are to remain protected from commercial development in perpetuity, according to conservation stipulations found within the original Aldridge land. Grants. When the question of guardianship arises, given Elias's status as a minor despite his newly recognized heritage, the matter resolves with unexpected simplicity as Miss Clara steps forward. Her testimony about that fateful night 50 years ago, and her subsequent protection of the hidden heir, establishing her as the natural choice to continue guiding him until majority. The court appointing her official guardian with access to Aldridge funds for both castle restoration and Elias's education and welfare. The village celebrates the verdict with an impromptu gathering in the square. Faces that once overlooked the quiet orphan, now beaming with vicarious pride and genuine affection, as they raise glasses to young Lord Aldridge and the castle that will remain a centerpiece of their mountain heritage rather than demolished for a corporate resort. Their collective protection during the confrontation, transformed now to shared investment in the future of both boy and historical treasure. Spring buds appear on the mountain slopes by the time renovation crews arrive at the castle. Master craftsmen and historical preservation specialists working alongside villagers who continue to volunteer their time. The project evolving beyond mere restoration to thoughtful rehabilitation that honors original design while incorporating modern considerations. All under the watchful eye of Elias, who moves through the growing activity with quiet confidence that balances his newfound status against the humility formed through years of simple mountain life. "Your parents would be proud," Miss Clara tells him one evening as they watch workers carefully reinstall the repaired fountain statue that Richard's men had shattered. "Not just of the castle you're restoring, but of the young man you're becoming despite everything that was taken from you." Summer sunlight bathes the castle grounds in golden warmth as villagers gather for the official reopening ceremony, their faces reflecting wonder and pride as they move along. Meticulously restored pathways that wind through gardens transformed from wilderness back to paradise, through a year of dedicated work guided by the ancient journal and funded by the Aldridge fortune reclaimed from the hidden vault. The blue roses form spectacular living walls along the main terrace, their impossible color more vibrant than ever as they respond to Elias's daily presence, while silver vines climb newly rebuilt trellises, their star-shaped flowers tracking the movement of guests with subtle rotations that cause children to giggle and adults to exchange looks of amazed disbelief. Fountains play in harmonious symphony throughout the extensive grounds, water flowing through the ancient engineering system now fully restored and enhanced with careful modern improvements that maintain historical authenticity while ensuring sustainable operation for generations to come. The central courtyard fountain rising in a 12-meter spire of crystalline water that catches rainbows in its spray and draws appreciative applause from the assembled village whenever the breeze shifts its dancing pattern. Terraced gardens cascade down the mountainside in a riot of color and form unprecedented in modern horticulture. Many plants existing nowhere else on Earth, preserved through the foresight of generations of Aldridge botanists, and now thriving again beneath the care of Elias and the small staff of professional gardeners he has hired to help maintain his family's living legacy. Miss Clara moves through the celebration with surprising energy for her advanced years, her weathered face transformed by joy as she watches Elias, no longer the solemn orphan but a confident young heir in simple but elegant clothes, greeting villagers with genuine warmth as he guides them through the paradise they helped resurrect, pointing out specific features restored by their collective hands during those early days when the outcome remained uncertain and corporate destruction still threatened. Thomas and his father stand beside the Eastern Water Distribution System, explaining its ingenious operation to fascinated university engineers who have traveled from the capital to study design principles centuries ahead of their time, while other villagers point proudly to stone walls they helped rebuild, plants they helped transplant, craftsmanship they contributed to the restoration that has transformed ruins back to the architectural and botanical wonder that once made Aldridge Castle a hidden crown jewel of the mountain region. Distinguished guests from the National Historic Preservation Society present Elias with an award for exemplary restoration of cultural heritage, cameras flashing as the teenager accepts with modest grace, acknowledging in his brief speech that the castle represents not just his family legacy but the mountain community's shared inheritance, its future now permanently protected through conservation easements established with part of the recovered Aldridge fortune to ensure the land surrounding the castle will remain unspoiled in perpetuity. As evening approaches and lanterns are lit along the garden paths, creating a fairy tale landscape of light and shadow against ancient stone walls now standing proud once more, Elias stands momentarily alone at the highest terrace, looking out over the celebration below, over blooming gardens that were overgrown wilderness just 1 year ago, over the community that once barely noticed him but now takes genuine pride in his success. His hand unconsciously touching the medallion and locket he still wears beneath his shirt, tangible connections to parents whose vision he has brought back to life through determination that transformed abandonment into homecoming, ruins into paradise. Autumn paints the mountain in fiery hues of gold and crimson as Elias sits on a stone bench in the highest garden terrace. Max resting his graying muzzle on his master's knee while together they watch village children race along pathways that wind between vibrant flower beds, their laughter rising above the musical splash of fountains to fill spaces once haunted by silence and secrets with the simple joy of unfettered play. 2 years have passed since the castle's official reopening, years that have seen stone walls that once isolated the Aldridge family from their neighbors transformed into gathering places where villagers now come freely for weekly markets in the outer courtyard, for educational programs in the renovated Great Hall, where local children learn botany and history alongside visitors from distant cities, for community celebrations in gardens that have become the pride of the entire mountain region rather than the private sanctuary of a single family. What began as restoration has evolved into reimagining, with Elias working alongside village elders to establish a trust that ensures the castle will serve future generations as both historical treasure and living resource. Its extensive library now open to scholars, its unique plants providing seeds for conservation efforts, its grounds hosting seasonal festivals that honor mountain traditions while creating new memories within ancient walls. The orphan boy once shuffled between reluctant guardians now moves through a world rich with connection, greeting the blacksmith's apprentices by name as they install decorative ironwork designed to complement original features, sharing afternoon tea with Miss Clara and her circle of elder women who gather weekly in the South Garden to share stories and wisdom, discussing agricultural innovations with farmers who have adapted Aldridge growing techniques to improve their mountain crops. His solitary existence replaced by a tapestry of relationships that offer the family bonds his early life lacked. Thomas, once the leader of childish mockery but now studying engineering with tuition provided by the Aldridge Educational Fund, approaches the terrace with architectural plans for the next restoration phase. His transformation from tormentor to trusted friend mirroring the broader healing between castle and village, between orphan and community. The past's wounds gradually mended through shared purpose and genuine understanding that transcends the artificial barriers of wealth and status. As twilight softens the mountain vistas into watercolor brushstrokes of purple and blue, parents arrive to collect children reluctant to leave their paradise playground, calling thanks to Elias with the easy familiarity of neighbors rather than the deference of subjects to lord, their acceptance of his place in their community complete and unconditional in ways that heal the deepest injuries of abandonment he carried throughout childhood. Max lifts his head at the sound of approaching footsteps, tail wagging as Miss Clara joins them on the bench, her ancient hand still strong enough to bring hot chocolate for the evening chill. Her presence representing the bridge between his lost original family and the chosen one that now surrounds him with bonds formed through shared trials and triumphs rather than mere blood relation. "We have done well, I think," she murmurs, following his gaze to where the last children chase fireflies in the gathering dusk, their carefree movements tracing patterns of light against gardens transformed from wilderness through vision and persistence, much as the abandoned child beside her has been transformed into a young man grounded in purpose and belonging, not just a paradise of flowers and fountains, but of people finding their place together.